I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. My family is originally from Los Angeles, New Orleans, Louisiana, Lafitte, Louisiana, and Belize. My grandfather is from Belize, so that's kind of my family background. Recently, I did the DNA swab and found out that my family was from Sierra Leone. My interest has always been in human behavior. Always. I mean, I've always been curious about it. Trauma showed up for me when I started really looking at trauma, and particularly violence. That was the area I looked at in my doctoral work, was African American male youth violence. And what I was trying to determine is, how can we predict this? What is the linkages, the causal factors involved with the use of violence? One of the things that obviously came up that you had to learn in order to be a clinician was post-traumatic stress disorder. That was one of the things that I studied, right? And I thought, wow, this is interesting. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a disorder that occurs as a result of a single trauma. In other words, the trauma can happen to you directly, or the trauma can be indirect. Now, we are most familiar with veterans of war, victims of natural disaster. We've learned about folks that carry this scar or this injury called post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, of course, I'm going to stop and I'm going to think, what does that have to do with Black people and contemporary use of violence? But if we were to look at the experience of being enslaved, and we start looking at the potential traumas, direct and indirect, that were experienced. Of course, reading slave narratives, we get a picture. 12 Years a Slave, Amistad, we get a picture. And reading the slave narratives, you get the voices of the people talking about their experience. So as I unpack what that looks like, I'm looking at generational trauma. Not only am I looking at generational trauma, I'm looking at generational trauma untreated. Because no one helped you with your trauma. No one helped you when they sold your child, or they raped your 10-year-old, or they lynched your son. No one helped you with that. There was no Dr. Phil coming in to work with you. So you did the best you could, right? But we're extraordinarily resilient, clearly. African American people are extraordinarily resilient. We had our own physicians. We had our own knowers and healers and people that helped the best they could. But then we got freed. Right? So you have all that trauma, no help, then you got freed. Did you get any help then? That would be no. You got no help. But did the trauma continue? You bet it did. Because following slavery was peonage, sundown laws, black codes, convict lease, which ultimately led into overrepresentation of criminal justice system. Oh, redlining, gentrification, straight line in terms of the trauma. But at what point did we heal? At what point was there an acknowledgement, one, that you've been injured, and two, that there's some need to heal that? Because if in fact I have post-traumatic stress disorder, which my theory of post-traumatic slave syndrome is not, but post-traumatic stress disorder is certainly connected. If people had post-traumatic stress disorder and it went untreated, then it becomes part of normal behavior. Now, what does post-traumatic stress disorder look like? Hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response, outburst of anger, difficulty falling or staying asleep, a feeling of foreshortened future. Those are some of the symptoms of post-traumatic. Well, if mama is exhibiting those behaviors, I don't know mama's broken. That's just mama. Oh, and my uncle and also my neighbor and everyone else. So then what we end up calling it is cultural. We say, oh, that's just how they are, right? And I would submit to you that's not just how they are. I've been to 7 countries in Africa. It doesn't look like that, right? There are issues in Africa, but they don't look the same because it's not based on that historical level of injury. So what I started to realize is that, no, it's not post-traumatic stress disorder. Oh, God, I wish it was. Because then we could put them in the room, we could get them the treatment, and they could get well, maybe. But we're looking at multi-generational trauma over time, collectively with social learning, what you learn in your environment, adaptive behaviors, good and bad, right? Healthy behaviors and other behaviors you adapt to survive. And then at the end of the day, folks call it cultural. So I think there's poison in the cookies. You couple that with things that we do know. For example, we've looked at other groups. We've looked at Native Americans and multi-generational trauma. We've looked at Aboriginal folks in Australia. We've looked at Jewish Holocaust. Why have we not looked at the history of generations of slavery and enslavement, followed by extraordinary Klan behavior and oppressive policies and lynchings? And it didn't stop. It's not like slavery ended and the playing field got leveled. That didn't happen.